So, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Mahlaqa Samdani. I'm with the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, an advocacy group that works to transform U.S. policy towards Pakistan and Palestine through congressional engagement. We are also committed to fostering informed dialogue on South Asian and Middle Eastern security and regional stability. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar at a time when relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan are at an all-time low, with escalating border clashes, a resurgence of militant violence, stalled negotiations, and an uneasy ceasefire brokered by Turkey and Qatar. Overnight, there was an attack on the Cadet College in Wana, South Waziristan in KP, and just this morning, a suicide bombing occurred in Islamabad outside the district court building, killing at least 12 people and injuring at least 30. Shortly after the attack, Pakistan's defense minister said the following: "The rulers of Kabul can stop terrorism in Pakistan. But bringing this war all the way to Islamabad is a message from Kabul to which, praise be to God, Pakistan has the full strength to respond." In response, Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has condemned the attack as well as the attack on the Cadet College. Pakistan's Prime Minister has blamed India for the attack without citing evidence. These are all fast-changing dynamics, and we shall discuss these and more with our four distinguished experts with deep insights into these very complex matters. So first, we have Dr. Aryan Sharifi, who is the former Director of National Threat Assessment with the former Afghan government and is currently the Chair and Master of the Public Policy Program at Princeton University. Next, we have Mr. Imtiaz Gul, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Research and Security Studies in Islamabad. He is a leading voice on regional security and extremism in South Asia. We also have Mr. Rafiullah Kakar, who is a leading public policy specialist, a political analyst, and expert on Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, and currently a doctoral candidate at Cambridge University. Last but not least, we have Ambassador Omar Samad, who was the former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada and is currently a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center. Thank you all so much for joining us. And before we begin, I'd just like to explain the format of today's discussion. I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions before opening the floor for audience Q&A. And so without further ado, we shall begin. Excellent. So we have almost all our speakers. Lovely. So Dr. Sharifi, let me begin with you. Let's just start with the central flashpoint between Kabul and Islamabad, which is the surge in Tehreek-e-Taliban TTP violence inside Pakistan. In addition to the spate of militant violence over the past 24 hours that I just mentioned, this year alone, there have been more than 600 TTP attacks that have killed scores of Pakistani civilians and security personnel. The Pakistani government blames the Taliban government for not curbing TTP attacks from Afghan soil. In your assessment, is the Taliban government unwilling or is it unable to control the TTP? And how much leverage does Kabul have over the group?
Mehlaqa, I'm sorry. I don't know if the question was addressed to me. I'm having trouble with my connection. I'm actually in Kabul right now, and the internet is pretty bad here. So
It is to you, yes. Were you able to hear the question?
I read the question before, so if the question has
Okay,
not changed, I can speak to that.
sure.
Please allow me to thank you and for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. My salam to Ambassador Omar Samad here and everybody who is listening to us and watching us. And please also allow me to apologize here. It's been really challenging getting connected to the webinar. So I hope that it does not get disconnected as we talk. Now the
Absolutely.
question you posed is a question.
Dr. Sharifi, you are breaking
Um,
up quite a bit.
if I'm coming through.
You know what? Why don't we uh while we while you maybe can try and figure out the connection, I could move to Mr. Rafiullah Kakar and we can begin there and then hopefully we can get you back with better connection.
Absolutely.
Okay. I all right, excellent. Okay, so then I will, now that we have Mr. Imtiaz Gul as well, I'm going to start with him. Mr. Gul, thank you so much for joining us. We were
Sorry,
having a
I was running late, yeah.
No problem. We were having a bit of a connection issue with Dr. Sharifi. So let me pose the next question to you. Um, and that is, I mean, we just saw, what happened in Islamabad today, and overnight in Wana as well with the attack on the cadet college there. So the TTP's resurgence has caused a lot of alarm, as you know, within Pakistan. And there are also reports that TTP presence has expanded into settled areas like Dera Ismail Khan, southern Punjab, and Balochistan. What, in your view, explains this renewed wave of militancy, and why hasn't the Pakistani government been able to curb TTP operations and expansion inside Pakistan?
Well, first of all, apologies for joining late. I was running late. It took longer than expected to be here. But thank you very much for having me, and good morning to everyone, good evening, or whatever. Now, we've been juggling with the same phenomena as to what has caused this unusual spike in the terrorist attacks. And now, once again, the terrorists are striking at Islamabad's doorstep, like the attack today. It's pretty gruesome. And one of a splinter group, apparently, of TTP has claimed responsibility for that. And then it supports basically Pakistan's claims that the TTP is behind this wave of terror that has been intensifying, particularly since the Afghan Taliban returned to power in August 2021. And the empirical evidence basically says it. Pakistan has experienced, if we look at the graph, severe deterioration in the security situation, including like minimum 50% increase in terrorist attacks since August 2021, and over 130% increase in casualties, both fatalities and injuries. And this trend has continued the last 3 years or so. And secondly, the presence of TTP leaders and families in Afghanistan, like their leader Nur Wali Masood living with his family reportedly in Kabul. He met with Pakistani delegations, both official and unofficial, in Kabul in 2022, before that and after that. So regardless of what the Afghan Taliban may say, the reality is that TTP's Nur Wali Masood or Hafiz Gul Bahadur from North Waziristan, they're all living in different parts of Afghanistan. And this is what constitutes Pakistan's dilemma. Pakistan says these people are there, you can basically rein them in. And the Afghan Taliban had initially denied their presence, but then obviously, as I said, they've been meeting with Pakistani delegations in the presence of Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister. The Afghans still remain very much adamant, and we all saw the press conference by the Foreign Minister Amir Muttaqi, who has been saying that you cannot hold us responsible for the security issues in Pakistan. But the problem is when the leaders, the planners, the core of a movement, or whatever movement it is, sits in a particular country for attacks in another country. And the host country then says that, well, we are unable to rein them in, or it, out of expedience, doesn't move against them. And hides behind different arguments, which at times don't make much of a sense. So that is a dilemma, that Pakistan has faced. And then obviously, when Pakistan's patience wore thin, it obviously indulged in kinetic attacks, the way the Americans had been conducting kinetic attacks in the hunt while hunting for the terrorists of Al Qaeda. This is how Ayman al-Zawahiri and several other Al Qaeda leaders were taken out, even including the TTP leaders like Baitullah Masood and several commanders who were found hiding in eastern Afghanistan. So Pakistan is following now in the footsteps of the United States in hunting down the suspects, high-profile targets. Obviously, Afghanistan has a problem of sovereignty. They accuse Pakistan of having violated their airspace. But the problem is, what are the options for Pakistan? Pakistan is damned if it doesn't move. Pakistan is damned if it does. So the dilemma is whether and how much to crack down across the border on all TTP hideouts. Privately, a lot of Afghans do agree that these people are there, and it now constitutes a big challenge for Pakistan. As for why Pakistan hasn't been able to stem it, it's a very complicated situation. These people have friends, families, supporters in various shades of life, whether it's in business or in religious seminaries, mosques, all across the border and along the border on the Pakistani side. So it's very difficult, despite the border having been fenced. It's very difficult to plug the gaps on the border. At places, I think the fence has also been punctured, broken by these terrorists. I mean, there are possibilities, options available, ways, to bypass the fence or to just break through it without being detected. So it's very easy to say that the Pakistan should control them, but the socio-political environment in Pakistan is such that even if Pakistan had 100% capacity to deal with terrorists moving across the border both ways, it won't be able to contain the entire lot. Partially, they can get a handle on this, but for that, the two countries have to be speaking. The two countries have to basically synergize and coordinate and then move jointly. Just one country, it's that old saying that hammer and anvil. So one country has to wield the hammer and the other country has to act as the anvil. Without that, it will be very difficult for any country to get a handle on the terrorists moving across the border.
Sure, and I believe that is the subject of all the rounds of negotiations that we have seen take place between the two countries. There is still the question of why the TTP has been able to expand to other settled areas of Pakistan, why it is able to recruit people from within Pakistan to its ranks, and I think we will get to that in a little bit as well. Mr. Kakar, let me turn to you. Local communities along the border in Pakistan have been protesting against military operations, and there is a risk that heavy-handed counterterrorism measures by the Pakistani military could alienate Pashtun communities further. It's also reported, as you know, that the TTP has been able to tap into the legitimate socio-economic grievances of Pashtun communities in KP and other parts of Pakistan to gain recruits. How would you characterize the Pakistani government's counterterrorism response over the past few years? And how effective do you think it is? Also, we know that the Pakistani military leadership is driving Pakistan's counterterrorism policy. It always has. Is there any coordination between the military leadership, civilian government, and local stakeholders in formulating a coherent response to the growing violence?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this important topic. I think there is no doubt that the Pashtuns on the Pakistani side of the border, particularly in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and areas of former FATA, have been protesting against military operations. And these reservations or these concerns stem from their bitter experiences of the past. So in the post 9/11 period, when we saw the resurgence of or the emergence of TTP in former FATA, after the initial years, the people of FATA and SWAT, they welcomed military operations. They backed the security forces in the hope of a decisive end to the militancy and a credible state commitment to eradicate religious extremism and violence for once and all. However, instead of that, the policy, the strategy of the state was defined by certain features which eroded the trust of the common people on the state and its commitment to eradicate religious extremism. So there are three things that I would like to highlight that have shaped the experiences of Pashtuns with regards to military operations. So first and probably the most important is the duality in Pakistan's Afghan policy and Pakistan's internal security policy. All along, throughout the post 9/11 period, our internal security and Afghan policy has been shaped by this duality in which the state distinguished between the good and bad Taliban. So apparently the TTP were considered the bad Taliban for whom the state had zero tolerance, and then the Afghan Taliban were considered the good Taliban for whom the state apparently had great tolerance and even provided tacit support to them. It was this duality in which the state supported one brand of Taliban and opposed the other brand of Taliban that undermined the confidence and faith of local people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and FATA on the state's policy and commitment to eradicating religious extremism and violence. The second key feature was the periodic phases of appeasement and negotiations with TTP. As you would remember, several rounds of negotiations were held with TTP in Waziristan and Swat and other parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And during these negotiations, the state basically relinquished control of territories in Waziristan or Swat to the Taliban. Now, what the Taliban or the TTP did was they used those phases to regroup, strengthen, and rearm themselves, and basically eliminate any local resistance. Now, this again was another major source of concern for the local community who previously had fought against the Taliban, grouped against them, and had even formed these tribal lashkars to resist and fight the Taliban. But when these territories were basically the control of these territories was relinquished to the Taliban as a result of these so-called negotiations, those tribal leaders or civil society activists and political leaders naturally were the first victims of Taliban who made every possible effort to eliminate. And as a result, we know that thousands of people were eliminated and more than over 1,000 tribal elders and political leaders in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and KP were wiped out in the previous phases. And lastly, another important aspect then, when military operations were launched, which, as I said, people did provide conditional support to, I think those military operations were also carried out in a relatively opaque manner. There were gross violations of human rights. There was little or minimal civilian oversight or supervision. And I think it was primarily because the Pakistani military was trained for regular warfare, not for guerrilla warfare of this sort. So as a result, there was some degree of inevitability in terms of the immense socio-economic costs. People were displaced in large number. This large-scale displacement sort of added to those grievances. So it is in the light of these bitter experiences in the past military operations and this local understanding that the Pakistani state does not have a zero tolerance policy for religious extremism. These two combined have led to a situation where many people in former FATA and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa no longer trust the state when it claims that it wants to eliminate terrorism or when it claims that it wants to eliminate Taliban. And I think the glaring example is the Pakistani state supposed to support to the Afghan Taliban. Almost all political stakeholders, with few exceptions, of course, opposed this policy for the past 20 years, precisely predicting the situation that we are witnessing today, that Pakistan's support to the Afghan Taliban would undermine and erode the hard-won gains against terrorism that have been made over the past 1.5 years. And I think, as we can see, with the ascent of Taliban to power in Kabul, the backlash, the resurgence of TTP, and the rapid deterioration in security situation in Pakistan, particularly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, is quite visible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that very detailed analysis. And we will have a follow-up about, how close of a coordination there is now between the Pakistani military leadership and local stakeholders in KP, the provincial government as well, which is directly involved and is, sort of bearing the brunt of what's going on in that province. But I just heard from Dr. Sharifi from Kabul. Unfortunately, the connection there is really terrible. He's not able to make a good connection and will not be able to join us, unfortunately. So, Ambassador Samad, let me ask you the same question that I had asked him. In your assessment, is the Afghan Taliban government, is it unable to control the TTP, or is it unwilling to rein this group in at this point, given what Mr. Gul had said, that there are the TTP leadership is somewhat based in Afghanistan and they do have direct access to them?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Ms. Samdani, to you, to your organization for organizing this very timely discussion. Since my question was of a different nature, I will try my best very succinctly to answer what Mr. Sharifi had to answer. And the very short reply to that is that I think given the reality within the Taliban structures, given the reality within Afghanistan, given the reality on both sides of the Durand Line, in the tribal belt, both on the Afghan side as well as on the Pakistani side, including not only Pashtun, but also Baluch populations and communities. I think that the Afghan Taliban, the de facto government in Kabul right now, which obviously is very much influenced by the thinking in Kandahar, is on both sides of the fence. I think there is a willingness to end this saga. I think that there is also an inability to deal with certain parts of it. There are probably differences of opinion, varying degrees of wanting, willing, not willing, and taking into consideration years of comradeship and camaraderie. And also, the whole fact that our friends mentioned about what we hear today, we Afghans who listen today to some of our Pakistani friends like Mr. Imtiaz Gul, who talk about good Taliban, bad Taliban, or Kakar Sahib, who also mentioned it, we hear the same narrative. You must hear the same narrative, the echo of the same narratives that were being somewhat displayed and somewhat presented by the Kabul government for years on what the Afghan Taliban and sanctuaries in Pakistan were doing versus what the TTP was doing and versus what the threat perception was like from Kabul. Now, ironically, it's the the same situation in a flip side, where Pakistan is somewhat repeating the same narratives that Kabul was, as you know, forwarding and presenting throughout the 20 years of the Republic. Anyway, I think that if you don't mind, I will get back to a little bit of the backdrop.
Yes, of course.
And if you want to pose the question, then please do.
Yes, let me thank you so much for that. And you're exactly right. Over the past 20 years, before 2021, Afghanistan, the Afghan government then had also accused Pakistan of sheltering the Haqqani network and also the Quetta Shura inside Pakistan when they were launching attacks on US-backed forces in Afghanistan as well. And now the script has been reversed, as we can all see. So, but again, going along with that, Ambassador Samad, the Afghan Taliban had maintained very close ties with Pakistan's military and intelligence agencies, relationships that had strengthened during the years of the US-backed Afghan government when the Haqqanis and the Quetta Shura was based in Pakistan. Could you help us understand, though, how this relationship evolved after the Taliban's return to power in 2021, and what explains the dramatic deterioration in recent years, and what could possibly mend relations at this point?
Sure. So in order for us to understand this latest episode, I think that we do need to touch base a little bit with what happened prior to that. You know, Afghan-Pakistan relations going back to partition time, all the way to the Dawood coup, and then the communist coup, and then the Soviet invasion, post the jihad period, where we were very close and worked together for the same goals. And then the post-jihad, the collapse of the communist regime, the somewhat of a factional warfare that took place in Afghanistan, especially in Kabul, and the lack of legitimacy as well as governance, and the weaknesses that existed, and then the emergence of the Taliban version 1 all the way to 9/11 and post 9/11. See, this is the backdrop. It is not such a simple situation. We all, those of us who remember or who study this, we know how we went through different phases. What I can tell you, not without going into the details, of course, is that at the end of the day, none of the Afghan players turned out to be long-term allies, whether it was for this country or that country, because at the end of the day, whoever ends up in Kabul has to take into account Afghan interests, has to take into account Afghan history, society, communal demands. And this is why we need to have discussions about all of this. We cannot ignore it. We cannot just swipe it away, and we cannot pretend like it does not exist. It's a reality that is. Fast forward to Taliban version 2, post-collapse, and the U.S. NATO withdrawal. It's a fact that despite sanctuaries and support networks in Pakistan, Taliban version 2 became less reliant on Pakistani, let's say, intelligence support and the networks in Pakistan. It actually underwent a form of diversification between 2014 and 2021. We saw that they were able to establish limited but secret ties with Iran, Russia, maybe even China. So Pakistan wasn't the only player. And so what you see today is somewhat of a manifestation of these changes in this diversification that took place. Their initial efforts of the Taliban efforts in 2002 and 3 was to reconcile with the new Afghan government. Unfortunately, that did not take place. By 2004 and 5, the Taliban version 2 re-emerged and decided that they were going to become insurgents. And the Afghan civil war that had started years before continued, but this time under an umbrella of the US and NATO being in Afghanistan. And it's no secret that Pakistan strategically supported the Taliban to maintain influence in Afghanistan. And when the Taliban returned to power in 2021, Pakistan initially welcomed the resurgence, but did not diplomatically recognize it. And expecting, I think, a friendly interim government, which was discussed in Doha, during the talks of the US and the Taliban between 2018 and 21. And that didn't take place. And I think that this was at the time when Imran Khan was prime minister. And whatever happened in Pakistan's domestic politics somehow may have been related to what happened in Afghanistan, and the fact that there was an expectation that the power structure in Afghanistan would be somewhat different. It was hoped, at least. Relations rapidly deteriorated post 2022 or so, to several factors, I think, due to several factors. Besides drastic changes on the Pakistani side and internal Pakistani side, the Taliban tried, I think, and partially succeeded in restraining the TTP, or at least trying to mediate between the TTP and Pakistan. But an emboldened TTP had already made territorial gains within the tribal regions of Pakistan. And for the military rulers in Rawalpindi, these efforts were and still are not enough. They think that Afghanistan is not doing enough. As I said, Afghanistan is doing, I think, what it thinks it's possible and what's feasible. But failed peace talks mediated by the Taliban between Pakistan and TTP also deepened mistrust. And thousands of families, civilians, were actually either pushed into Afghanistan, and then they became targets of attacks, as well as Afghan civilians. And we saw even the attack on Kabul city a few days ago, which I think will remain in Afghan history as a very momentous occasion. It will not be forgotten, the same way that it was that the British bombardment over a few days in 1919, if I'm not mistaken, was never forgotten by the Afghans. So right now, mending relations is important, and it will require goodwill from both sides, I think, to provide undeniable proof that there are claims and the counterclaims that have to be based on evidence. So this is important, these latest tensions have an external, sort of a strategic, proxy-driven geopolitical motivations. The two sides need to focus on confidence-building measures and technical steps to diffuse tensions. The emirate, this de facto government in Kabul, needs to provide proof and seek ways to not be implicated in the TTP activities that take place in Pakistan. And Pakistan needs to take responsibility for its own actions, its own security inside its own borders, and provide undeniable evidence to shut down alleged terrorist outfits, including terrorist outfits in Pakistan that are being reported that belong to the IS Khorasan province. And for both sides to engage in what I consider a sustained, genuine diplomacy and respecting each other's security and sovereignty concerns. So confidence building measures, discussions, talks are absolutely essential. I think diplomacy has to play a role. But again, if there's some other plan behind the scenes that is driving all of this, then Afghans are very much aware of how to try to navigate the situation, because they have been victims of such manipulations in the past. And I think that they're keeping a very close eye and close watch on not just what is happening in Pakistan, but what is happening in the region and what is happening internationally, globally, in the great power competition that is taking place.
Thank you so much for that, Ambassador Samad. Could you elaborate a little bit on what those geopolitical considerations are that you just hinted at?
Well, you have Afghanistan as a somewhat of a sensitive geography, and you have 6 neighbors, and you have a country that is not recognized, with the exception of just Russia, but has somewhat of a growing relationships with some of the regional stakeholders. It is a country that is still under sanctions. It's a country that's somewhat semi-isolated from the international community. Even the banking system is disconnected. It's an impoverished society. It has come out of almost 50 years of warfare. It has what seems like a stable situation, secure situation, with the exception of what is happening. And its airspace is controlled by another country. And the airspace of Pakistan at times can be used by other countries in order to, maybe attack certain threats or target certain threats. You also have a situation where we have a deal, the Doha 2020 deal between the US and the Taliban. And that is a counterterrorism deal that specifically talks about which groups, Al Qaeda and any group that threatens Western interests or American interests or American allied interests, that has to be handled in a certain manner. And that apparently that deal is still holding. And that deal is not something that the Americans are too worried about. But we also have a new situation, which will probably lead us to the next question that you had for me about U.S. intentions, about what background means in all of this. So if you want, we can discuss this later on. But from a geopolitical perspective, you have great power competition. You have China, which obviously is a very big player. You have the tensions between Pakistan and India that continue. And there are accusations now by Pakistan that India is somehow, supporting the Kabul regime, the Taliban regime against Pakistan, which I'm not exactly sure how much evidence exists for that. And you have the Iranian Middle Eastern issue, which also borders Afghanistan and the tensions that exist between different powers in the region. So all of this, obviously, at some level, in some ways, can manifest itself in proxy warfare. And so what Afghans fear the most is that their country will once again become a proxy battlefield, either for regional powers or for great powers and others who have a stake. And so we are, I think, and I don't know exactly, hopefully the Taliban have the same approach, but most Afghans believe that Afghanistan's stability and Afghanistan's somewhat constructive role in the region can be to the benefit of everybody. Whereas the instability and warfare in Afghanistan, in any type of warfare in Afghanistan, can not only destabilize certain parts of the region and our neighborhood, but will also not allow us to prosper as we want. We will not also allow for the economic interaction that has to take place. So there's a win-win situation that we need to push for. There's a lose-lose situation that we need to avoid. And there's a win-lose situation that I think we need to think twice about before engaging in any type of proxy warfare.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Samad, for that very sobering analysis. Mr. Gul, let me turn to you. And I would love for you to also respond to what Ambassador Samad said and, what you think about Afghanistan being used for proxy warfare. The Pakistani Prime Minister this morning did implicate India and said that India was behind the attack, the suicide bombing in Islamabad, and also about what Ambassador Samad said regarding ISKP presence in Pakistan at this point. So do we see some of these dynamics take place, and how are you assessing them?
Well, thank you very much. Let me first start off with what Ambassador Omar Samad has said. I mean, largely he is on the dot, but a lot of people do err when they try to equate the Tehreek-e-Taliban Afghanistan with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the narrative that Umar was talking about. It's very unfair to draw an equivalence between the Afghan and the Pakistani Taliban. The Afghan Taliban are not a globally designated terrorist organization. Its leaders are, whereas the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is a globally designated terrorist organization, both by the US and by the United Nations. Now, having such an organization based in a country where, according to the UN reports, the Al Qaeda is training TTP in camps set up in Afghanistan's border regions. This is not Pakistan saying, this is the UN investigation report. So we should not really try to equate the two organizations and also gloss over facts that even Iran, China, Uzbekistan have problems with the people, with the groups which are based inside Afghanistan. So it's not just about Pakistan alone, but about other regional countries who have a problem with these groups. So Pakistan supported the Afghan Taliban. Of course, there were multiple places where they were hiding or where they were operating or getting support. But it is ultimately, it was a support for the Afghan people. The same Afghan people who are right now celebrating the defiance that the Afghan Taliban have shown to Pakistan, the threats, the intimidation that has flown in direction of Pakistan from several Afghan ministers, including Amir Muttaqi. So most of the diaspora, the Afghan diaspora, is also celebrating that. And that also explains this deep running animosity, the dislike for Pakistan. I don't know what's the reason, but we should also, this is the second point I would like to make, that he spoke about the refugees and about the trade suspension. Obviously, everybody, not a single person should get harmed, even if somebody is legally overstaying somewhere and then is being told or being sent back to their country. This is a Pakistan's decision. It's a sovereign decision. I only deal with the humanitarian side of it. And the Pakistani Prime Minister has also repeatedly said that they should not be disrespected, that people, though being sent, should be handled with care, with grace. As for the bombardment, I think the Afghans should also not forget the bombardments that the Americans carried out, the drone attacks that they were carrying out, the termination missions, the squads, the night raids that happened during the 20 years of occupation by the US forces. So it's, of course, if anybody gets affected through a drone attack, through a kinetic attack, it's wrong. It needs to be reprimanded. But the problem is, what does a country like Pakistan do? Aman al-Zawahiri was detected in the middle, in the center of Kabul, for example. So is Nur Wali Masood sitting there. So, I don't, the problem is we should not be in a state of denial, whether it's Pakistan or whether it's Afghanistan. Both, I think, leaders have to indulge, as Umar said, in a rational dialogue, dispassionately, for the larger benefit, the benefit of people living both sides of the border. So it's, we should not basically indulge or lunge back into the history when we are trying to take on the other side. I had for long considered Afghanistan as my second home because most of my professional career I've been going in and out. I was very recently in Kandahar and Kabul. I met with Zabiullah Mujahid, had a great meeting with him, also with people in Kabul. The problem is geopolitics. Whether that geopolitics is breaking this bond between Pakistan and Afghanistan apart. What does India do? They have been publicly saying, Jaishankar just 2 days ago said that Pakistan's failure to have good relations with Pakistan, with Afghanistan, has now opened up a strategic space for India. So, and also the way Amir Muttaqi was received in India, that also showed, and this is what led to Pakistan's suspicion that Afghan leaders may now be trying to leverage relations with India for pressurizing Pakistan and for stonewalling Pakistan's demands. And I think the biggest test for the Afghan Taliban is to explain as to whether the terrorist attacks which are being claimed by the TTP are part of jihad. Are they jihad? Are they legitimate? And is the Afghan government accepting the TTP as a jihadist party? Or in the past, of course, they fought together. But right now, when multiple countries are treating them as ISKP, as a proxy terrorist group, as much as the IMU or ETIM, Ararul Hind. So what is the Afghan government's position, and will it condemn by decree the terrorist attacks by TTP if it is claimed? So it's a big test. I think the Afghan leaders also have to come clean on this. They are being called out for the jihad aspect of what TTP demands. I mean, one of the recent videos, I think, by Nur Wali Masood also spoke again of the jihad. So unless there's clarity on whether they are hosting them officially, whether they condone their terrorist activities inside Pakistan, activities that may be planned inside Afghanistan. So this friction will continue, the tensions will grow, and obviously those interested in driving a wedge between Afghanistan and Pakistan will benefit from it, will try to fan those tensions and the disagreements between the two countries. And I think a lot of that is currently at play.
So this morning at the introduction, I did mention that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Afghanistan did condemn the terrorist attacks that took place in Islamabad and also in South Waziristan overnight. And so that has been taking place. I would also like to, and I also wanted to speak to the question of the Durand Line, but I'd also like to bring in Mr. Kakar sort of around this, the Indian involvement in all of this. How much evidence do we have that India, with these renewed ties with the Afghan Taliban government, is becoming more active in Afghanistan and could possibly be supporting the TTP or any other of these militant groups?
Is this question addressed to me?
It is, yes, Mr. Kakar.
Thank you very much. I think the possibility of involvement of any regional or extra-regional player cannot be ruled out, given Pakistan's relationship with India and Afghanistan. I mean, Pakistan doesn't enjoy cordial relations with both of these neighbors. However, I personally am I take these claims with a pinch of salt, both made by the Pakistani side, the Afghan side, the Indian side. I mean, here is the bitter truth. Rather than defending our respective national positions, I would rather like to be more dispassionate. And I think the truth is that currently, all of these three countries are using proxies as part of their foreign policies.
Mm-hmm.
I would also like to admit the bitter fact that Pakistan has been the pioneer. Pakistan has been using Islamic militancy as a tool of its foreign policy since the 1980s. Post the withdrawal of Soviets from Afghanistan, we made it a key part of both our Afghan and India policy. In the post 9/11 period, this was the key pillar of our Afghan policy. And I think what the Taliban currently are doing is they basically have taken a leaf out of the Pakistani playbook and doing exactly the same that we did to the regimes of Karzai and Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan. And what is the basic sort of pillar of that playbook? It is that it is based on this duality, that the official position is that we will not allow our soil to be used against our neighbor, but in reality, we support and host the group that your country considers a terrorist. This is what we did in the past 20 years. This is the bitter truth, and I respectfully disagree with my colleague. We didn't do it for the Afghan people. We did it in pursuit of whatever the Pakistani establishment thought of its national interests. Not even this Afghan policy or India policy is not even something that is defined by the civilians or the Pakistani civil society or other stakeholders. So I think these claims about all accusing each other of using or sponsoring or supporting certain militant group. I think they are by and large sort of accurate. With regards to TTP in particular, I think right now, as of today, Pakistani fears of Indian involvement are exaggerated. I think it is primarily a Pakistan-Afghanistan issue, and I have clarity in this that as long as the Taliban are in power in Afghanistan, TTP will remain a potent threat to Pakistan's security. Uh, with the Taliban in power, TTP will remain in existence in one or the other name, and I think for the Taliban, I think they are just simply playing the double game that we had been playing against the Republican regime. I wouldn't rule out future Indian involvement, but right now, as of today, I think these claims about Indian involvement in TTP's resurgence are exaggerated.
Thank you. So what is the way forward, Mr. Kakar? Because the Taliban regime in Afghanistan is pretty entrenched. And if you're saying, yes, go ahead.
From a Pakistani perspective, to begin with, I think I would like to admit that we don't have easier choices. There are very tough choices that we have to make. And partially, we are in this mess because of our own policies. We brought the Taliban in power. We ensured that the hard-won gains against terrorism that the Pakistani state, the Pakistani security forces, and the people achieved over the past 15 years, they have been eroded and they are being reversed. So I think right now there are few choices because the Pakistani state doesn't enjoy good relations with the non-Taliban powerful stakeholders in Afghanistan. We alienated the non-Taliban Mujahideen in the 1990s, in the 2000s, 1990s and 2000s onward. We alienated the non-Pashtuns. We alienated the Pashtun non-Islamists, Pashtun Afghan nationalists. So even if, what I'm trying to say is, even if Pakistan tries to follow an aggressive policy vis-a-vis the Taliban, there are very few groups that Pakistan can rely on in Afghanistan for a cordial engagement and partnership, because we seem to have burnt all the boats. And I'm also cognizant of the fact, as I said, as long as the Taliban are in power, establishing durable peace in Pakistan will remain an illusion. So I think moving forward, of course, the goal should be to nudge Afghanistan move toward a political situation where there is a government in place that has some sort of democratic credibility and that can invest in building an Afghan state. We can't have peaceful neighborhood if a neighboring state is ruled by a militia. When there is a stable and peaceful stable Afghan state with stable institutions and mechanisms for peaceful transfer of power from one group to another, I think this is something that the Pakistani state should strive for. And I think internally, again, from Pakistan's end, I believe that Pakistan will also have to take a number of confidence building measures to gain the trust of the Pashtun community that lives along the border and that has bore the brunt of the military operations and the pro-Taliban policies. And for that, I think the current political dispensation in Pakistan is quite exclusive in terms of its regional composition. I think the Pakistani ruling coalition will have to make concessions to the PTI, which currently is the most popular political force, at least in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. You can't launch military operations and a potential war against a neighbor without bringing on board, without taking into confidence the people that have bore the brunt of those policies and who are going to be the most important stakeholders in whatever action and decision you take. For that to happen, transparency, political concessions to PTI, and all other steps that would ensure local confidence and local confidence in the state's commitment to eradicate this problem for once and all. Without these measures at the domestic front, I think it would be difficult for the Pakistani state to open so many fronts, where on the eastern front, we have a warlike situation with India. On the western front, we have a warlike situation with Afghanistan. Domestically, we have so many fronts. We have an active insurgency going on in Balochistan, and in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it's not an insurgency, but there definitely is serious unrest. I think we need to address these domestic issues, bring on board local stakeholders, and then come up with an Afghan policy, an internal security policy that is defined and supervised by Pakistani civilian stakeholders, not a policy that is shaped by the military establishment alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are some very, very important points that you raised, and by a legitimate civilian government that has the mandate of the people. So thank you for pointing that out. Ambassador Samad, we actually do have to open it up for audience Q&A, but I do want to give you a chance to respond to what Mr. Kakar said about the fact that as long as the Afghan Taliban are in power in Afghanistan, there is very little chance of the TTP being reined in. And how would you respond to that? And is there any movement towards a broader coalition of political parties that could be a part of an Afghan dispensation in the future?
Well, what I would say is that, also using that dispassionate pinch of salt analogy, and none of us, representing any government or any political front. I personally am not as an individual. I can tell you that there are many lessons to be learned from history, both Pakistani history, Afghan history, governance issues. So you see, I think that all politics at the end of the day end up being local. And so one has to ask: is TTP a reality that is rooted in domestic Pakistani politics and governance issues, which now is being blamed on Afghanistan? The Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, were also a manifestation of weaknesses in the Afghan system. For years, Pakistan told us that they are disenfranchised brothers or disenfranchised people who need to be brought into the fold. Well, let's look at what's happening in Pakistan itself. Are these people disenfranchised? What are they complaining about? Why are they fighting? You need to ask those questions the same way that we Afghans have to ask the same questions internally about our historical experiences. And currently, we still have homework to do. I am not going to here defend anyone. We continuously remind people who are in charge today in Afghanistan that legitimacy comes from the people. Legitimacy comes from some sort of consultation with the people, the voice of the people, the advice of the people. And governance is there to serve the people. I'm not going to lecture this to the Pakistanis. It's none of my business, but I am doing so as an Afghan to my own people, and that means that in today's context, the Taliban have some lessons to learn from our history and how to be more inclusive, how to be more participatory, how to better govern, how to address the needs of the people, whether they're economic needs, social needs, political needs, whatever they may be, communal needs. And how to connect to the world eventually. So we do have all these issues, and we do have all the lessons, and we do have all the experiences. It's for the Pakistanis to decide on how to deal with TTP, I think, and to look at the domestic context in which they emerged and how they were used as proxies. Yes, there are groups that are being used as proxies and continue to be used as proxies. One day you're a proxy, the next day you're a ruling faction, and then you create your own. But part of this, unfortunately, is part of reality. Part of it is what we need to avoid by all costs. On one hand, is to shift blame, is to not take responsibility for what's yours. It's to become a pawn in somebody else's game. And in order to prevent all of this from happening, and there may be reasons why some people do it, you need to realize that you will eventually pay for it, one way or the other. Maybe not today, but tomorrow. And this is exactly how as the analogy with the chicken and the eggs and the roosting of it's the same thing. And so I think that this is the time to aim for something better, that win-win situation that I talked about earlier. Win for Pakistan, win for Afghanistan. Where is the framework that we need to work on? What are the issues? There's some homework on on the Afghan side on the Durand Line. We need to have a discussion on the Durand Line. It's an historic issue. We cannot let go of it, but at the same time, we need to come to terms on the Durand Line. We haven't. And Pakistan needs to understand this instead of, trying to use Afghanistan unsuccessfully, very unsuccessfully, as its own strategic depth, and involve Afghanistan in anything and everything that has to do with India. So tomorrow it will be some other conflict, and the roles can reverse again. And so I think that good leadership, wise leadership, democratically or people-rooted leadership, taking into account your interests, has to take all of these factors into play. And we cannot continue, using the same games and double games and triple games. So again, I don't want, because I know we're running out of time. Unfortunately, I have to leave you in a couple of minutes, but I hope that there are some lessons that we can all draw from this.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Samad. And yes, I know you do have to leave, and I really appreciate your time. We do have a few more minutes with our other guests. And so please, when you do have to leave, absolutely do so.
Thank
and
you
we
again.
so
Yes, I
appreciate
will.
your
Thank
insights.
you.
And I will get to some of the questions from our audience as well. But Mr. Gul, Ambassador Samad just mentioned the Durand Line, right? And from Pakistan's perspective, this is a settled international border, but it remains a source of controversy in its bilateral relations with Afghanistan. How does Islamabad view Kabul's continued refusal to recognize it? And what does Pakistan believe would need to happen for this issue to be put to rest?
Well, I think this is an old story being whipped again and again. The Durand Line, as our Afghan friends refer to it, as its unsettled question or unfinished agenda. I think this issue got buried the day Afghanistan removed its objection to Pakistan's entry into the United Nations back in 1947. So the day Pakistan was recognized, that was with the currently existing 2,560 kilometer long border with Afghanistan. So, secondly, border has never been on the agenda of any official bilateral engagement. Whenever both countries met their delegations privately, officially, or otherwise, this would not be on the agenda, particularly in the official meetings. Never. Even President Ashraf Ghani quietly accepted when Pakistan began fencing it. So why even think about this issue at all? I mean, repeated references to the Durand Line as a hypothetical and imposed border, and the refusal to recognize it as the official demarcation between the two nations, I think amounts to living in the past. The moment Afghanistan recognized Pakistan, so for me that issue was dead. And sadly, whether it's the Taliban or Pashtun Afghan nationalists, they keep advocating for Afghanistan's territorial integrity, which everybody must respect. Pakistan should also respect, and they keep bringing in the element of this imaginary line, they call it. Sorry. But this runs contrary to the sanctity of the internationally recognized boundary since 1947. They cross it with visas. We go into Afghanistan with valid visas. So this paradox of kicking up the issue every now and then somehow has to end, and all Afghans shall have to maybe agree to give up on this Durand Line mantra, which they frame as an unfinished agenda. I discussed this recently also with Zabiullah Mujahid. He said this is an issue that the nation shall have to settle. The people living on both sides of the border. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
But I believe, as a last point, that Taliban or the diaspora, every Afghans in general, shall have to maybe initiate a national dialogue, a national debate on this issue to bury this Durand Line problem for good. This is what would be good for both Islamabad and Kabul. Just keep referring to this issue doesn't help in help both countries in moving forward. So yes, both have to discuss it dispassionately, but foremost, I think the Afghans shall have to basically look at it as to whether they really need to bring this up in their bilateral conversation.
I see. I think did we just lose Mr. Kakar?
Looks like, yeah.
Oh, there he is. He's back. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gul. I think that's a very useful sort of approach to this. But I would also like to bring in Mr. Kakar and ask for his response regarding Mr. Gul's perception that the Durand Line seems to be a relic of the past. It's a question that is brought up repeatedly by the Afghan side. But I'm wondering how much of that plays into Pakistan's security threat perception. The fact that this keeps, is constantly raised, and if this border issue needs to be settled once and for all, and how can that be done? I mean, what needs to be done on the Pakistani side to be able to resolve this issue?
Thank you very much. I think I largely agree with my colleague Imtiaz Gul Sahab. I think officially the Pakistani state, the Pakistani strategic community has rarely taken up this issue with Afghanistan. For them, it's a settled issue. Informally, of course, it does play into the perceived threat calculations of the Pakistani state, and the Afghanistan supported the creation of a Pashtunistan state in the first few decades after Pakistan's creation. So Afghanistan's reluctance to recognize the Durand Line, combined with the initial history of the first 2.5 decades, this does sort of play a major role in shaping the way the Pakistani state perceives its threat from Afghanistan. So informally, it does play out, but officially and formally, I largely agree. And I also think that the Pashtuns, including the Pashtun nationalists on the Pakistani side, have also reconciled to this idea of the Durand Line being the international border. They do refer to it in their political rhetoric, but they do recognize, most of them now even have officially sort of made these remarks where they recognize it as an international border. Of course, the other side is that it has divided Pashtuns. People have communities, people have their land, people have their relatives on the other side. But I think despite all this, most of the political stakeholders on the Pashtun, this side of Pakistan, they also recognize it. And I think it is time for, as Ambassador Samad said, for Afghanistan to come to an agreement on this. And I think it is an issue. If I was advising the Afghan government or the Afghan state, this is an unnecessary thorn in Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship and has added to the security anxieties of the Pakistani state vis-a-vis Afghanistan. And this perhaps is one of the reasons why certain hawkish elements within the Pakistani strategic community do not want a stable and powerful Afghan state as a neighbor. As Imtiaz Gul Saab highlighted, historically as well as from the perspective of international law, Afghanistan's position on the Durand Line doesn't have any support as far as international law is concerned. Yeah, it's a very valid moral claim in the sense that it has divided historically, culturally, adjacent and similar territories. It has divided tribes. So it's a fair and valid argument. There is perhaps also some truth to the Afghan claim that it was signed under duress. Afghanistan was a weak state caught in the great game between two powerful neighbors, imperialist forces. I think this is also true. But unfortunately, the bitter truth is that this is how perhaps boundaries of half of the world were drawn. Colonial powers, imperialists drew international boundaries across the world in this fashion. As a result, we see that the international law is also very conservative when it comes to the treatment of treaties and agreements pertaining to international borders. So I think given that Afghanistan's position on the Durand Line is not aligned with international law, historically the Pashtunistan issue has been used by the Afghan ruling elites to prop up their domestic political constituency. They have used it as a bargaining chip vis-a-vis their relationship with the Pakistani state. It is time for them to come to terms with it and address this issue for once and all, because for all practical purposes, the Afghan state does treat the Durand Line as an international border, be it, as Imtiaz Gul highlighted, recognizing Pakistan as a state in the UN, or signing the transit trade agreement with Pakistan, or other sort of international diplomatic norms and protocols that countries follow with each other, that Afghanistan also follows vis-a-vis Pakistan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, I have already taken up so much of your time, but we do have two quick questions. And if you wouldn't mind staying for another 5 minutes, perhaps, I would really like to turn to those questions. Perhaps, Mr. Gul, you could answer the first one. And that is from Mr. Ansar, who asks, can the guests please explain what are the TTP's key demands and why Pakistan's negotiations with them failed in the past, and how the Afghan Taliban position fits into it? So that's for Mr. Gul. And the question for Mr. Kakar is, can Pakistan engage the Northern Alliance to leverage their support against TTA and pressurize it to rein in the TTP? Or what other options does Pakistan have to influence the Taliban Afghan government for a positive outcome? And we have recently seen that there have been some sort of inroads made with Ahmed Massoud, who is the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud. So if you could please answer those questions, Mr. Gul, if you could go first.
Oh, thank you very much, Arif. The basic issue that divides both Pakistan and Afghanistan, as well as the TTP and Pakistan, is the TTP demand that the former federally administered tribal areas, which we call FATA, be restored back to the status of May 2018. They have been now mainstream, turned into formal districts, and they also want the Pakistan army to withdraw from that entire region. So they just want a backyard for themselves. So I'm not sure which of the Afghan Taliban factions also want the same, for a fallback area, for a buffer zone between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But this is the primary demand, the restoration of FATA, as well as the pullout of the Pakistan army. This is a demand that no functional state can accept by a ragtag army, by an organization that is globally designated as a terror outfit. And this is why the talks had broken down. And I will interpret it the following way, that since it's a proxy terrorist group acting on somebody's behest, it placed a demand on Pakistan that Pakistan could never, most probably, agree to. That is the restoration of FATA as well as the pullout of the army from the border areas.
Thank you. And I think they also would like to see Sharia imposed on Pakistan. Is that
Well,
correct?
I think that is just a ruse. Just because if I were to tell you something that there are people within Afghanistan, within Taliban, who also want the same. So I look at it not only as a demand by the TTP, but also by certain Afghan elements, just because they are not sure as to when the situation might uh, get adverse for them. So they need a fallback area, and the former FATA areas provide that fallback region. But I just hope that both Afghanistan and Pakistan, both countries sit together instead of brinkmanship. They indulge in cooperative dialogue, which I'm sure the Afghan Taliban as a whole also want, because they know there is adversity in the country. Economy is not good. Politically, they are not uh, very well connected internationally. They are still under sanction. So the best way forward for any conflict to settle down is dialogue, and I'm sure Pakistan would be amenable to it, and I hope the Afghan Taliban, despite all the bickering and the bitterness that we have witnessed in recent days, will put it aside and step forward to engage in dialogue on whether this relates to the TTP or whether it relates to the opening of the borders for the benefit of people, traders, farmers, worker, laborers on both sides of the border.
Of course, because those border communities have really been devastated because of the consequences of these tensions. Thank you so much, Mr. Gul. Mr. Kakar, if you could respond to the question about Pakistan engaging with the Northern Alliance to leverage their support against TTA.
Thank you, Muhammad. I think Pakistan does have a number of options to influence the Afghan Taliban. To begin with, I think the first thing that perhaps both sides need to consider is to put an end to this public posturing, which is characterized by false bravado and even xenophobic hate for each other. And I'm saying this for both sides, both the Afghan side and senior responsible people on the Pakistani side have been guilty of this. I think Pakistan and Afghanistan are neighbors. You can't change your neighbors. That's the bitter reality at the end of the day. So communication and respect for each other, even in the way they talk to each other and talk about each other. In terms of the other options, I think the option of Pakistan engaging the former Northern Alliance to pressurize the Afghan Taliban is perhaps the least effective, in my humble opinion, because Pakistan has lost the trust and confidence of most of these anti-Taliban political forces with Afghanistan. Over the past 2-3 decades, Pakistan sort of single-handedly put all of its eggs in the Taliban's basket, and it lost all sort of relationship with these other groups. Secondly, even if Pakistan manages to build bridges with these groups, and Pakistan is currently trying, and it will take a while, but there might come a time when Pakistan will have sort of rebuilt that relationship. I think the capacity of those groups to put off a serious challenge to the Taliban within Afghanistan is quite limited. So for these two reasons, I think this is something that Pakistan perhaps will try. It will take a while, but I do not necessarily see it as a very effective option. I think the other two options are using regional geopolitics and taking into confidence other important stakeholders such as China, the United States, Iran, Russia. These other important regional and extra-regional stakeholders also have an interest in stability in Afghanistan and Central Asian countries. All of these players want an Afghanistan that doesn't provide sanctuaries to terrorist groups. This is something that Pakistani state can tap on and use all of these regional players to pressurize the Taliban. Pakistan also has economic options to influence the Taliban. I think in terms of economic options, not only enhanced trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also providing enhanced access to Afghanistan to maritime trade. This is another option that Pakistan, economic resource diplomacy that Pakistan can deploy. And lastly, I think the coercive option, I think Pakistan, owing to its aerial sort of superiority, can continue to use cross-border aerial, targeted aerial strikes as an instrument to target TTP hideouts and to pressurize the Afghan Taliban into expelling TTP elements from their soil. So I think there are a number of options with Pakistan, including both political, economic, and security options that they can deploy to influence and perhaps arm twist the Afghan Taliban.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned so many regional powers who have an interest in ensuring stability. You did not mention the US, which has been trying to lay claims to the Bagram Air Base. Do you see the US as a source of stability or destabilization, real quick?
That's a very good question. I think with Donald Trump as the US president, the US policy is quite unpredictable. But I believe, or I'll be surprised if Donald Trump's claim is bought even within the UN security establishment. I think the US, at least prior to Donald Trump, has lost interest in Afghanistan, and they have very limited interest in Afghanistan in the sense that they want the Islamic State or former Daesh to be contained and Afghanistan not becoming a hub of Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. I think Donald Trump's desire to retake Bagram Air Base is unrealistic, politically not feasible. I think it would be a suicide for the Taliban to do something on these lines. I don't think the Taliban will ever agree to it. So I think despite this, I think the US security establishment will want to have an Afghanistan that has a minimum level of stability and more importantly, doesn't become a hub for terrorist groups such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Great. Well, we have come to an end of this webinar. Thank you so much, Mr. Gul, Mr. Kakar, our guests, Ambassador Samad. Dr. Sharifi unfortunately could not join us for such a thoughtful and substantive discussion. I think what emerges from your insights is a picture of two countries that are caught in a very vicious cycle of mistrust, where militant groups exploit porous borders, weak institutions, and historical grievances. It seems as if sustainable peace may not be imminent, but as we've heard today, understanding the complexity of this very fraught relationship is the first step towards reshaping it. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our audience. Please stay in touch, and we hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.